hello. Welcome to our remote work management strategies webinar. My name is Albert Chukshaw. We're going to spend about the next half hour together, hopefully about the first 15 to 20 minutes, just talking through some of the basic elements of DISC and then how to use that tool to help manage some of the folks who maybe never have worked from home before or never to this extent, or some of the challenges that they may be facing, certainly in addition to some of the other things that are happening in the world right now. And just thinking about the ways that we can, as leaders, play a more substantial, better, more emotionally intelligent role in their worlds so that we can help lead them more effectively. So just to kind of give you an idea of how we're going to spend the next little bit of time, we'll start just with a quick overview and understanding of how DISC works, what the structure looks like. Again, very brief overview. Then we'll dig into a little bit more about how the strategies that you can use, or what the strategies you can use to manage folks remotely using DISC tools. And then finally, we'll let the time available for any additional questions or any specific situations that you wanted to address. So we'll go ahead and dig into everything right now. First, just a quick overview of understanding human behavior with respect to DISC. First, to give you a perspective on how this works, this isn't necessarily groundbreaking stuff in a lot of ways. 600 BC, a whole long time ago, Hippocrates helped to assemble what was referred to as the four humors, which have also been translated into the four elementals. So as you see here, fire, air, water, earth. And basically this idea that personality has four dimensions is almost literally ancient. We have known that about humanity for a long time. What's different in how we use tools like DISC is that we have some information to go on behind that. And with a whole lot of research, we've discovered that behavior is really influenced by three things. First is genetics. We have a genetic component to our personality. There are incredible stories and some really interesting research about the heritability, so the inheritance, the heritability of certain genetic or certain personality characteristics within families. There are interesting twin studies and stories. So it shows for sure that there's a genetic component to the way that we behave. Now from there, we have our core personality. And this is sort of central to who we are, but that also is, our behavior is also influenced by our experience. So what is it that we encounter when we learn from things in our lives? And that, of course, shapes the way we behave. Now, DISC itself is a behavioral tool. It is not a personality or purely a personality tool. And the reason that distinction is important is because we have a choice in behavior, and we'll talk a little bit in a second about what that actually means. Now, DISC as a framework is something that was invented by a guy named William Marston back in 1928. A little interesting tidbit here is he's also the guy who came up with the character Wonder Woman. So a pretty multi-talented guy. And his work helped to spawn the many different versions of DISC that exist out there. So the frameworks are all basically the same. If you have done a DISC profile from any of the many providers that you've seen, you've probably seen some elements of this. And basically the model kind of works like this. You break things down into four basic styles, just like we referred to before. And in this version, we're going to use a circle, and we're going to kind of cut this circle in hemispheres. So if we go along the midline, if you look at the top, this would be, if you have folks who are in this hemisphere, these people tend to be active. So they're very fast-paced. They're really dynamic in the way they express themselves. Whereas if they're on the lower hemisphere, these folks tend to be more thoughtful, more moderate, more calm in their approach. So that is how we would see this grouping of styles. Now, if we were to cut the circle in the other direction, we looked at the left and right hemisphere. On the left side, you're dealing with folks who may be more questioning, so more focused on logic, who want to look at more of the details, whereas folks on the right side are going to be a bit more accepting. So these people are more people focused, empathizing, receptive in how they approach situations. So again, sort of how you look at that. So if we cut the circle in both directions and we take those core words, if we look at folks who are active and questioning, these people are going to be the D style or dominant. Whereas active and accepting, these folks are I or more influence oriented. Accepting and thoughtful, more S or the steadiness style. And questioning and thoughtful, C or the conscientiousness style. Hence DISC and where that acronym comes from. Now, some quick information about how these styles work. If we look at each style, let me give you a quick view here. Our D style colleagues are folks who tend to have high ego strength, very goal-oriented in their approach. I want to be very careful about that word ego. Folks may tend to get a little uncomfortable with that word. That's more referring to having a real heavy comfort in their decision-making. Basic fear, being taken advantage of or loss of control. Under pressure, may show lack of concern for others and feelings. We'll get into that more in a minute. I's, these folks tend to be very optimistic, lively, and approachable in the way that they work. Basic fear here is social rejection and can become disorganized under pressure. S's are the folks who are steady. That word is absolutely perfect for the folks who tend to fall into this style. They tend to be consistent, team-oriented folks who are concerned about losing stability and can become overly willing to give in. I'll dig a little deeper into this when we start talking about how to adapt to these folks from a management perspective. And then C, the conscientiousness style. These folks tend to be very task-oriented, analytical. When they're uncomfortable, when you're pushing them, their basic fear is criticism of their work, and under pressure, they can become overly critical of themselves and others. So just as a broad view, a couple of other things I wanted to make sure that I helped to convey. This is about style. These are behavior tendencies. This is not, well, I'm an S or I'm a D, so this is how I'm going to act. We have a broad version, broad way of behaving in any or all of these styles. We're also a blend of all styles. So for instance, I am someone who you might not by style expect to be incredibly detail oriented, but I spent a whole lot of my career in market research. So clearly I was able to make that adaptation. Now it wasn't as easy for me than some of my colleagues where that came more naturally, but we're still a blend of all styles. And most importantly, we can stretch to other styles. We have the capability of doing so. Now, let's talk a bit about remote work management strategies and what we can use, how we can use these tools to really help capture or to help engage some of those folks who, again, are maybe feeling some things that are really challenging. For many people, this idea of remote work is novel. For leaders, it may be something that was not even allowed in their organizations. For followers, this may be something they've never done, or maybe they did once when they were sick, not certainly as a way of life. So this creates some new pressure, and folks are feeling that pressure right now, not just because of maybe the deadlines or assignments they've been given, but I mean, the general anxiety of what's going on right now. They're feeling pressure, and that pressure can lead to conflict responses. So we want to talk about both how these styles might respond in those situations, and they're going to have different needs and likely approach working from home or working remotely very differently. So first, I want to hit the most important element of this is the golden rule is great, right? Do unto others, that's fantastic. But in this case, it's not enough. We really have to treat the way other people want to be treated. So let's talk a bit about what that looks like. All right, D-oriented personalities are going to be driven. They're going to get their work done by tendency. That's going to be something that they're going to be very comfortable with. These folks are going to be thriving on competition. The challenge is that because they are maybe in a remote work environment, they don't have the level of social interaction, even by video camera and things along those lines, that they may not be able to show what they feel like is their best because they thrive on that competition. It's hard to see where you stand because all of these other people are involved but they're not visible. They're not people you can interact with. From a pressure standpoint, we really have to think about how they can they tend to interact. So under pressure, these folks can overstep, they can overrule others, they can kind of be blunt and sarcastic in the way that they work, because they're trying to get to a bottom line result. They're trying to push hard, and if someone's getting in their way, they'll tend to try to push really hard through that situation. Now, in conflict, what's great is productively, they'll be very straightforward. They'll be willing to address issues. Unfortunately, they can be a little insensitive or impatient, and they may create some win-lose situations. So it's something to keep in mind. So when you're adapting to these folks, think about how they want to be treated. So in their case, they're going to want to have information direct and to the point for them. You want to make sure that you're listening to their ideas, because they're going to want to express it, especially because they're likely to feel a little cooped up in the work environments that they're in. They may practice some selective perception here and kind of hear only what they want to hear in certain situations. So you need to make sure that you're checking for understanding when you're talking to these folks. You may want to provide, if you don't already, some forum for them to talk about progress or to show their progress. That's going to be something that I think they're going to find to be really beneficial and help to continue to be motivating. And then recognize their achievements when they have made progress. Again, that's going to be something that helps to continue to motivate them throughout. Now, I's are going to have a different approach. Even though they're on the top hemisphere, there may be some things that they approach a little differently. These folks may really struggle with this remote work situation, because they're not going to feel as connected to the team. And because that's such an important part of how they work, that may be an impediment for them to staying motivated and staying energized. Again, not to mention all the other pressures and challenges that they may be facing as a result of all these situations. Now, under pressure, these folks can tend to be a little impulsive. They may take some things personally. They may maybe over-rely on some of their gut feelings, because they have to move forward, so that's how they're going to approach a situation. They may not have a great idea of how long things take, especially because this is a novel situation and they may not have experience in it. They may struggle with that. Under conflict situations, they can be incredibly empathetic, and they'll provide reassurance. That's something that's pretty common in this style. Unfortunately, they may get overly emotional. They may gloss over things. They may take things a little bit more personally than you might expect or need them to in that moment. So when you're adapting, you really need to be able to give, as a leader, some time and space to these folks to allow them to express their feelings. And if you're doing good leadership, providing some flexibility for folks to talk about their fears and anxieties, because that's so crucial in a time when there's just this much uncertainty. They may not be able to take in a lot of negative information, and that may be very challenging for them. So you may have to soften some things where you're providing some criticism or some pushback or some constructive feedback, and try to do your best to make yourself available by phone and ideally by video. We're finding in our remote work, which we've been doing in our organization for years, that by doing a lot more video, which is something we've done over the past year or so, that we're much more connected as a team, even though we're constantly spread out throughout the country, not just because of our office locations, but because a lot of us travel on a pretty consistent basis to our client sites. So being able to see each other and make that eye contact can be incredibly beneficial to your work relationship. Now for S's, I'm going to start with, this may be particularly challenging. That steadiness style, that discomfort with change, this is a real curveball for all of us, but in particular for folks of this style. So this may spark some resistance in these people, and it may be really unexpected because that's not how they will tend to approach situations when you've worked with them in the past. These folks may surprise you either with the way that they handle something emotionally or whatever. Once they figure out how to navigate this, which usually happens pretty quickly, they're going to return to those steady performers that you expect. I don't see that being a long-term challenge for them, but you may have to provide a lot more reassurance than you might have for some of those D or C colleagues. Now, under pressure, they can tend to maintain the status quo. They may be overly willing to give in. some of the existing methods, or why can't we do it this way, can continue to surface even if there's so much change. And they may just wait on certain situations before taking action. So you may have to probe them a little bit. Now, in conflict, productively, they can be really flexible, emotionally aware. They can be tactful in certain situations. Now, the challenge is they can withdraw in unproductive tendencies. They can withdraw, they can ignore issues or avoid tension, and they can allow things to simmer under the surface. And because they're remote, they can check out in ways they could never check out in the office. So getting to those folks and recovering them is going to be a lot harder. This would be someone who the old adage of a stitch in time saves 9 would be really helpful. If you can invest your energy into these folks now, you're going to keep them on board. Trying to rescue them after a challenge is going to take a lot more work. So I might recommend you think about that. So as you're adapting to these folks, be aware that they may not be as upfront as some of the colleagues. So there'll be people oriented, but they may not be as easily willing to express some of their opinions. You really try to present the information that you do have. I know we all are saying, I don't know a lot these days, but if you have information in detail and you can share that, they're going to be incredibly appreciative of that. And recognize that as you may be having some challenging conversations, they may pull back. It may take a couple of times to have that. And I'm going to ask you to approach these people in particular with an exceptional amount of empathy. Now, the last style, the C style, conscientious, these folks are logical. They can be really effective remote workers. They can dig in. This may even be their preferred style. A couple of C friends of mine, we've been talking about this, and they said they prepared their whole lives for this kind of work. So this may work out perfectly for them. Now, if in spite of that reality, they may need more information than you have. So they may look for more context. Looks like, sorry about that. Looks like I got muted somehow. I apologize. Anyway, these C styles will tend to maybe give excessive context. They may get bogged down in some things that you wouldn't expect them to get bogged down in, and really kind of get overly involved in some challenges, get into some details. And again, in situations of uncertainty like this, you may not have enough information to provide them with that kind of data. From a conflict perspective, these folks are really good at finding root causes of problems. They can sort things out pretty quickly, focus on some facts. The challenge with these folks, they can tend to be a little defensive. They may push back really hard. They may get very critical or overly analyze a certain situation, and maybe isolate or withdraw if things get particularly stressful. So you need to keep an eye out for some of these things. If you can adapt to these folks, adaptation really is taking advantage of some bottom line, some email communication is going to be probably best with these folks. You may want to minimize, in spite of the fact that it would be a really great idea to have video conferences and interact with folks over video in some of these other situations. You may want to refrain from that with some of these styles, or minimize it because they may not be terribly comfortable. And be prepared. They're going to ask a lot of aggressive questions because they're going to want to know. They're going to want that certainty. They're going to want the details. And just recognize that they are under pressure. They are struggling with this just like we all are. And that may be one of the ways that they go to try to solve problems. So just in context of all that, I want to give a little bit of a bottom line. First is some interesting research about, this was the percentage of leaders who experience this state of mind often or regularly. And what's interesting is not the percentage of leaders from this research, because I think most of us would be defined by some of those lower states of mind. What I wanted to put this in here for was because we're in those lower states of mind right now. We're stressed, we're tired, we're anxious. Many of us are frustrated or disappointed or angry, and some may be depressed, hopeless, or desperate. We may find that not only us as leaders, but some of the folks that we're following are not in these higher states of mind that generate better decisions. So we have to keep in mind that this is going to be a leadership challenge for us all. And how do we get there? First, we have to manage our energy. We have no choice in the matter. We only have a certain amount of energy. Certainly we can step up, but we need to make sure that we're okay, because if we're not okay, we're not going to be able to lead our teams effectively. People are going to remember how you made them feel in this moment. If they felt cared for and that you were honest, they're going to remember that. If they felt like you didn't care or that you weren't taking their concerns seriously, that will be remembered too. And that may have long-term impacts on you as a leader, and something really to keep in mind as you're thinking through how to be the right leader in this situation. Ultimately, this is going to be about adaptation. We got to serve in this situation. We have to be able to understand other people's styles and do our best to adapt to that. And ultimately, even if it's not your style, even if you're someone who wants bottom line results, or maybe if you want to dig into details, it's going to take you a little extra energy. So back to my first point, be sure to have those in reserve. Approach folks with patience and empathy. This is not an easy time. This is unprecedented, quite literally, in any living human's memory. And we've never been here before. So recognize that there are a whole lot of folks like you who have the similar anxieties and fears. And no, they're not necessarily the leader in all the cases, but they're scared too. And the more that we can make sure that we're adaptive in that situation, the better we're going to be as leaders. If you need a reference guide for some of the information I just kind of shared with you all today, that's s21.us/DISC remote work cheat sheet. It's just s21.us/DISC remote work cheat sheet. We can send that out to you. It's available online. Lastly, if you want to connect with us directly, this is why we're here, to have these conversations, to help you through things. Whether or not you're a client, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to address any issues, challenges, talk through some of these things. Quite frankly, we're all in this together. And so any way that we can be of help or of service, we're happy to do that.